This garage floor doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look good either. I live in Wisconsin, upper Midwest of the United States. We have 4, 5, 6 months of pretty cold weather, and that makes life pretty difficult on a garage floor. This one's 10 years old, and that means 9 winters of snow melting on the garage, and in particular sodium chlorides getting on the concrete, eating it away. I have, last year I sealed this with a clear sealer. I wish I had done that right from the start. It would be in better shape. But I want to do something to make this look better. In the very front of the garage, you can see here where very little of that chlorides would get. Things are pretty easy on its life. Looks pretty darn good. But then areas here, especially around the cut line, seems like those chlorides get down in there and seep into the concrete and then come back up. It actually started coming up under the sealer, and there's a little bit of texture to it. I've got other areas, small areas here where it's starting to eat away at the concrete. On the other side of the garage, this is the third stall where I typically park. For probably 6, 7 years, I had a half-ton truck consistently parked on this side, and in the areas where those tires sat, the concrete has crept and there's some low spots. And I've had some failure of the top coat of the concrete. This was done in late fall, so it was cold when they finished the garage floor, so I don't know if that was part of the problem. When it was originally laid down, I'm getting some of this delamination from the top finished surface down to some of the aggregate there. So I want to take care of this too. So that leads me into my prep. And what I'm going to top coat with, I want to do some sort of paint, epoxy. I'm going to have to do some repairs on this, and I want to be able to cover it up and have one nice uniform look in the garage. I have not purchased the epoxy or paint I'm going to use yet, and regardless of what I do, I'm going to start by grinding the top surface of all of the concrete. It's a big task, but to get the best job, what I've found is you got to do this. I could do some sort of etching and cleaning up, even so I've got that sealant down right now, so things aren't going to necessarily want to stick to that. And if that fails, both things are going to come off together. There are some products I could prime the surface with, some chemical products I could use to help prepare the surface for paint. But to get the look I'm after, I think I'm going to have to grind. So what I have here is just a 4.5-inch angle grinder with a diamond cup. This one's Master Force. And these have pretty good reviews. They make large grinding rigs just like wood floor sanders to do the big areas. But regardless, I'm going to have to start with this to do the edges. So I'm going to just experiment with this, see how it goes. I'm going to start with the wife's side of the garage because it's getting late in the year, it's October, and I know she's not going to want to park outside in winter. The background noise you hear is the heater already going, so that's another thing. It extends my time where I could do this because I've got the ability to heat the garage and keep it warm enough for the paint or epoxy to cure properly. But I'm going to start with squares, basically where I've got cut lines. That'll be I'm going to do this in chunks if I use this. Otherwise, I'm going to do all the edges first, prep, rent the grinding machine, get it all done. We'll see how it goes, how this is to use, how aggressive it is, how easy it is to control. One of the negatives with using this smaller area is controlling the depth of it. So I don't want a bunch of lumps and bumps all over. The bigger the disc, generally the smoother your surface you have. So I'm cognizant of that, but we're going to test drive it on the edges. See how it goes. Took me half an hour to do that little spot. So I've heard people rent the big units. It takes them 8 to 10 hours to do a full garage. Actually, half of this garage is the one I watched. And I get why. The concrete's a lot lumpier than your eyes would lead you to believe, especially even with the 4-inch disc. There's a lot of high spots and low spots. So I've got a history in auto body, so I'm used to standing those things out, which in this case doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a floor. We're going to cover it with some sort of coating. And we're not going to look at it like we do a car and reflect light on it and see dents and dips. But I want to take the obvious ones out if I can. So I'm going to think about this. Definitely works very good for the edges. I'm going to keep using it for that. I decided to explore a little bit coming out in the corner. That wasn't terrible to keep doing. But this area with the saw cuts will probably take an hour and a half if I extrapolate what that took me to completely grind the area. So that's not too bad. The thing that's tough with a rental is I've got all this stuff sitting on the floor, and I suppose I could split it up into 2 days, do half one day, half the other day. But there's just a lot of things to manage and move around, where if I just do it piece by piece with this little hand grinder, it's a lot more flexible and easier to swallow chunks of time. So we'll see. Okay, I just made up my mind. I'm gonna do this square completely with the hand grinder, coat it before I move on to anything else, and then make a judgment on how to move forward. All right, just finished grinding. I ended up doing wet for the second half, and it actually worked a lot better. It's a little bit more to manage, and obviously you can't get your electric tools very wet. You got to manage that. But it cut down the amount of dust, 95%. So the cleanup was a lot easier. You can just hose it down the drain. I've got a drain in the garage, so that works out pretty good. And just had a flow coming on to the area I was working. I'm gonna definitely do that from now on. Plus it cuts better. You do have to be a little careful. You can cut an edge in and make a big gouge in it. Again, it's just a garage floor. It's not like the hood of a car. But I did repair most of those. I did a couple of those. So now I just have to let it dry. And then I think I'm gonna use a 1-part epoxy or just a floor paint. I decided to go with this UGL Dry Lock Concrete Floor Paint. It's a 1-part acrylic paint. I just did one test section and we'll see how it turned out. I'm skipping over this because, spoiler alert, it did not turn out very well. While waiting for the initial test area to cure fully, I ground the second part, and there were some areas where I had to do some patch repair, which we'll cover, and then go over the results of that paint. I've ground this area next to be painted, but there's a little bit of damage here, and specifically where the top layer of concrete has delaminated from the substructure. Basically where the top cream, when they finish it, is now peeling away. The exact reason for that I'm not sure, but I could correct that by grinding everything down, but it's just thick enough where I'm going to lose a lot of concrete to do that and probably create a depression where water is going to sit. So I don't want to mess with that too much. Before we patch over the top of it though, we need to make sure all that debonded material has released from the substructure so we don't get peeling up in the future as we drive over it. The easiest way to do that is what I call a tap test. So you take your hammer and gently tap the concrete around the defect, and you can hear a noticeable audible change in the area that's structurally sound and the area where that surface has debonded slightly. Here's our defect. We can hear right there
right in that area, there's still some more material to come off. This side seems pretty solid. So what we're gonna do, you could use a punch or a chisel, try to remove that material, but we've got the claw in the back of the hammer. So we just continue this process till we're down to solid concrete. Now that we have our spot cleaned up, I'm just going to trowel on some of this ready mixed concrete patch. This stuff's a polymer, kind of a based vinyl mix, so it's not like you're dealing with mortar, something with a lot of aggregate or stone in it. That's pretty hard to work with. This is more of a paste, like you're doing drywall or something like that. All right, give it a few more days. I'm glad I did before it went on. And clearly the paint does not like getting parked on, which is kind of head scratching for something that says garage paint. But clearly it's lifting up. This stuff is not the solution. We did have a cold snap, so the tires were quite cold, so I don't know if that did it, but regardless, I can't keep using this stuff. So at this point, I'm very disappointed with the concrete paint I put down, but I only did about a third of my garage, so now was the time to check and adjust. Because it wasn't adhering to the concrete very well, I didn't want to put anything on top of it because this paint underneath would compromise the bond. So I had to strip it away, and I decided just to go at it with the grinder again and remove it all by grinding. So at this point I'm grinding all this concrete twice. And to be honest, I wasn't too happy about it. So I'll admit this project's going a little sideways. I made a mistake. Do not use that UGL concrete paint for your garage floor. I mean, it says right on it, for garages, resist tire pickup. It's garbage. Don't do it. It's false advertising. It almost broke me to regrind this entire floor to remove that paint, and it's a little bit harder to grind paint than it is the initial concrete, but I got it done. So instead of going to the low end paint, I've gone to the other end and got one of the more expensive products. This is by Rust-O-Leum. They've had out their epoxy, two-part epoxy paints or coatings for quite some time. I've used that in the past, and it was much better than that UGL paint that I used, but it wasn't awesome. But they've come up with this RockSolid product, and it's the top rated by thisoldhouse.com and some other sources that I saw. It's not really an epoxy, it's a polycuramine, which is a little different material. So you do have to mix this. It's more complicated. It's not just like putting the paint on, but they've come up with a real unique way to deliver this product to make it really easy to use. So they've got this two-part pouch. There's a separation in the pouch for the two parts. You break that separation, knead it up in this packet, and then cut the corner off and squirt it on, and then roll it out. They give you two foam rollers because this kit comes with two of these packets. So I thought that was really cool. I got to give props to Rust-O-Leum for thinking outside the box. In that epoxy shield, you've got two cans. You mix the cans together, stir it up. Anyway, this pouch idea is pretty cool. We'll see if it bears out. And it's supposed to be significantly better coating than the standard two-part epoxy, so we'll see. So it comes with flakes, rollers, and this is a etch, so kind of an acid that we mix to water and pre-etch the concrete before putting it on. Now I've ground my concrete. I don't think I need to do this, but I'm still going to give ourselves the best chance at this stuff sticking. I'm gonna lose my mind if it picks up with the tires like that other paint did. To prepare for etching the concrete, I just went ahead and misted it to get a little moisture on the concrete. Then I used a watering can to mix the etch, or to make the acid solution basically. Spread that around the concrete and then used a broom to get 100% coverage. Set it up, left it on for a half hour, and then rinsed it off. That's all there is to it. Pretty simple process. Now it's finally time to put on the Polycuramine. The burst pack worked exceptionally well. You just set it on the ground and knead it. There's a partition between part A and part B that you press down on the pouch and it breaks, and then the two chemicals combine. And then you knead it around for a bit, cut the corner off, and then you can just use it, the bag, and pour the Polycuramine out of it, and then spread it around with the foam roller here. I used a disposable brush to go around the edges, and then worked in 4x4 sections as the instructions tell you to do, and move the Polycuramine around. Worked pretty good. It does take a little bit of working in different directions to get an even spread of the material. And then once you get it down, it does a really good job of self-leveling, so all the brush strokes and everything go out of it. And then I finished it off with the included flakes. Now, because you are mixing a two-part product and you're starting a chemical reaction that you cannot slow down or stop, there is always a little bit of a sense of urgency to get done as quickly as possible, or you're under a time requirement to get the product put down. And I felt that during this first application process. As I got more familiar with it, I learned I had plenty of time and just to slow down and relax a little bit. But that's part of the process of using something for the first time also. And we can see here, pretty easy to dump out some product out of the pouch. There's really not a lot in it. It's not 100% solid, but I think it's 95% solid. So a little bit actually does go quite a long ways. There's not a lot of solvent or water in the product that needs to evaporate over time. So what you're putting down basically is what you end up with as a final product. So a little bit does go quite a ways, but this was the end of the first pouch here. So it didn't quite go as much as anticipated, or as much as full coverage shows on the package. And again, that always says up to 400 to 500 square feet for this particular two pouch system. So per pouch, that would be about 250 square feet. I ended up getting about half of that. So this is the second pouch. You can see burst that partition and then knead it around. It works out pretty darn easily for mixing it, instead of having to dump one into another and then use a drill to mix it up or something like that. I really like this system, and will use it again because of this, but then also the final results that we'll go over. Here's the final result of the first application. So the first part turned out pretty well. There was no tire pickup, there was no quality issues, very happy with it. So I decided to move on. But I learned a couple things after doing the first section that I'm applying to the second. First of all, I did all the patch repairs before I did any grinding on the garage floor. I still stuck with that vinyl patch. That is a very good product. I really like that. So I continued to use that, but just filled all the cracks and any spalling before doing the grinding. This allowed to come back and do the grinding, and the vinyl patch grinds pretty well. It's a little bit different than the concrete, but if you're careful in those areas, it gives you a very nice finished surface. Here's another large area of spalling or delamination. And you can see I already went through and did the tap test and chipped off the loose material. And this defect was quite large. Kind of lines up with the contact patch of a tire. But so filled it in, need quite a bit of product. I let this dry and tested it with parking a car on it before doing any grinding or moving on to cover this, just to make sure that it withstood the weight of a vehicle, and it did just fine.
So I'm happy to report that this vinyl patch does work on areas large like this. I was a little bit concerned that if I put a patch like this under the polycuramine and then parked on it, that it would kind of ooze out or couldn't withstand the weight of the vehicle, but it does just fine. So happy with the areas that I repaired like this. And again, you have to be careful when you grind this area. The vinyl patch is a little bit softer than the pure concrete, but if you're careful, this feathers and blends very nicely into the concrete, and once you coat it with the top coat, you don't even know it's there. Another thing I learned, because of the self-leveling characteristics of the polycuramine, any high spot that you have, it's going to flow off of it. So it particularly happens on defects like this one that was exposed when I was grinding the middle part of the garage. So I really took my time on the middle here and repaired every little defect, because you can see them after the polycuramine cures, and it kind of flows to the bottom of the defect, and any little high spot is kind of not covered as well as the low spot. So one other thing that's kind of amazing is how large this defect was, or how much concrete was compromised versus when I saw it originally. It kind of tripled in size once I chipped away all the bad material. But that is one thing: be picky and use the vinyl patch on any imperfection that you see. Another thing I learned, even though the directions say to use a disposable paintbrush around the edges, and just the foam roller, from professionals watching them apply similar products, they used a metal trowel or scraper. In this case, I'm using a drywall knife to spread around the polycuramine first, and it works very well on edges. The nature of the product, it's not like a paint, it wants to flow. So this metal scraper or a trowel, in this case a drywall knife, works very well at distributing the product kind of evenly to start off with. So this technique I tried on the middle of the garage, and I was very happy with it. I continued to use this and completely abandoned the use of a paintbrush around the edges. This is definitely the way to go, in my opinion, to do the gross dispersion of the product. Having that stiff edge allows you to distribute the product easier and avoid pools of it. After distributing it around, plus it allows you to get to the edge of a wall very easily, and goes quicker than using a brush. So you can see here, just work around the product, much like plaster or anything else like that. It's kind of an interesting product, how it flows and moves. You know, it takes, after a while, you get a pretty good feel for it. So once I kind of distributed the product around, I came back with the foam roller as kind of the finishing touch on the final distribution. But the foam roller doesn't do a great job of moving the puddle of the polycuramine. The drywall knife did a much better job of that. And then the foam roller kind of does the finishing touch. So that, I'm going to stick with that as my finishing technique. Use the drywall knife for the gross distribution, and then come back and go in multiple directions and different ways with the foam roller, just to give the final touch, making sure it's spread out evenly. as we enjoy the time lapse of me finishing the middle section here. One other observation or learning from this is using the drywall knife to better distribute the polycuramine. I got closer to the coverage rate as noted on the box. So each pouch should get about 225 square feet of coverage, maximum coverage. And here I ended up just under 200 square feet for one pouch. So that's about ideal. I don't want to stretch it super thin. I want to get a decent thickness of coating. But I probably put it on too heavy in the first part, trying to spread it out completely with the roller. A drywall knife definitely helps make the product go farther and give a more even distribution of it. I've got the full garage now ground. I did it all on this one 4-inch diamond grinding cup by Masterforce. There isn't much diamond left, so I pushed it to the last minute. But I got it all done with this one. Probably should have bought a new one about halfway through, but then you get almost done, you're like, well, now's not the time I'm gonna buy a new one. Anyway, just waiting for it to dry. I did the acid etch already, waiting for it to dry. So I could put the polycuramine on, and the light is, I can see it at the end of the tunnel.
Finished the third stall here. The job is complete, except I need to rearrange all my cabinets and workbenches here. But I'm having a hard time putting it back in the same spot because I like how clean and nice this wall looks without anything cluttered up against it. So I got to figure that out. But this third stall went pretty well. I was able to use one pouch of the Polycuramine to do this entire area. So at first I struggled a little bit with coverage, but using that drywall knife or a trowel to spread it out first and then go with the foam roller really helped evenly distribute that and make it go further.
So the big question left is how is this going to hold up over time, and the initial indications are quite well. But because I did the floor in sections, this part is the oldest part. It's gone through a couple snowstorms, so it's gotten salt. And the other nasty little thing that you get with snow on the vehicle is a lot of gravel from the road, sticks into that snow, the snow melts, disappears down the drain, but you're left with gravel. On the floor, we can see some of it heading towards the drain. But the other nasty thing that does, if we zoom in here and look for it, we can see some scratches in the floor coating from that gravel. So if you come in here and put the brakes on a little bit, they'll actually slide underneath the tire and tend to want to scratch that up. So is this a problem or not? I don't know. What I'm going to do is wash this down, go with the broom, clean it up. I'm not going to mop it with soap or anything like that, but clean it up and see if that disappears. If we remove the dirt from the top, can we still see that damage, or does it look pretty good yet? All right, the verdict is in. It is really easy to clean up. You can see there is still some discoloration where the car drives in and out. And I think that is because of those scratches. We can see here, there are still some scratches in the coating. It's not down to the concrete, so it hasn't compromised the coating layer, it doesn't look like, but there's definitely some scratches. Those scratches tend to retain dirt. Although, maybe not. If I scrub it harder, those come away. So it looks like if I just clean this better, that will come off of there. So that discoloration will come out if I scrub it harder. Here's an interesting spot I had. It must be the rebar from the concrete's rusting. And I ground it down. I didn't want to grind into the rebar and expose it because that would just make the problem worse. So I went over it. And there's some rust coming through. In this spot here, this will wipe off. So durability-wise, actually, this is better than I expected. I thought those scratches were in there for good, but they'll actually come off if I scrub it with something, maybe the pressure washer. I'll use that surface cleaner. Once I get the garage kind of put back together. It's not perfect, obviously, over time. I think it continue to scratch it, it'll probably wear it away or maybe get a little discoloration, but it is way better than that concrete paint. And maybe I'll have to recoat this at some point in the future, but I think it's at least be manageable. So again, best price on this Rust-O-Leum RockSolid product I found on Amazon. Link to that product below in the video description. Thanks for watching. Now I gotta get busy figuring out how I'm gonna put all this stuff back and not make it as cluttered. Probably have to throw some stuff out. Thanks for watching. Adios.